In this video, we're going to get back to our editor and write some code. We are going to write code using what we learned about in theory in the last one. So we're going to see how we can create that function that we use with the new operator. To kick all of this off, we're going to create a new folder in JS Bootcamp, and I'm going to call this one OOP for Object-Oriented Programming. And then inside of there, we're going to make a new file, and I'm going to call this file person.js. And person.js is where I'm going to stick my implementation for person, the one we explored in the last video, where we have first name, last name, and age, and we have our methods, things like set name and get bio. Right here, I want to kick things off with a bare bones example. Let's make a variable person, and I'm going to set it equal to, and then we're going to create a regular function, not an arrow function. I'm not going to set up any arguments, and I'm not going to put anything inside of the function body. Now we'll talk about why this can't be an arrow function in a few minutes when we actually add code in. For now, we're going to leave it just like this. Down below, all I'm going to do is create a variable. I'll call it me, and I'm going to get its value from calling person with no arguments. Then to wrap up this example, we're just going to console.log me. Now, based off of what we know about JavaScript, what's going to print from me? Well, we know it's going to be undefined. We call a function. The function doesn't explicitly return anything, so undefined gets implicitly returned. We store that in me, and we print me. We can prove this is what happens by running the script. Over in the terminal, I'm going to cd into our new folder, out of the functions folder, then / into the OOP directory. And once I'm inside of here, I'll just use node person.js to run the script. Right here, we are indeed getting undefined. So this is nothing new. We already know how to do all of this. What I want to switch up is just adding the new operator right here. So before the function call, we're going to add in new followed by a space. So we do want a space separating our function call from the new operator. With just that change in place, we're going to save the file once again and rerun things from the terminal. When I run them this time around, we can see we are no longer getting undefined. What we're getting is our function name followed by a space followed by an opening and closing set of curly braces with nothing inside. This is our very first custom object type. The object type gets its name from the function, and currently we haven't set any values. That's why there's nothing showing up right here. What we've done is we've created what's known as a constructor function. Functions that get used with the new operator are constructor functions. The constructor function itself is where we can initialize the data for our object. So in our case, we have an empty object over here, no properties were set up. Eventually, we will set some properties up, and we'll do that right here in the constructor function. So as I mentioned in the last video, all of our instances are going to have the same attributes for a person, first name, last name, age. For a car, it might be color, year, make, model. It is not the list of attributes that differs, it is the values for those attributes. And this, the constructor function, is where all of that gets set up. Now, before we go any further, I want to talk about why we're getting very different results in the terminal, even though the only change we made was adding on the new operator. Behind the scenes, the new operator does a few very important things. The first thing it does is it generates a new empty object for this new instance. Then it gives us access to that empty object in the constructor function via the this value. So let's go ahead and just prove that part right here. All we're going to do is console.log this. Now, the only time we've used this before is when we've created methods, functions on our objects. Well, this also comes up again inside of our constructor functions. In this case, this refers to the new empty object. So if I were to go ahead and run the program after saving things, what are we going to get? We're going to get the same output twice. We are printing the new empty object up above. Down below, we are also printing that new empty object. Now, the only reason we have access to this in the constructor function is to start customizing it. So here we can define the individual pieces of data that a person should have. We could say, for example, that a person should have first name. This dot first name. I'm going to use a capital N to stick with camel casing conventions. And then we're going to set this equal to just a static value. We can provide a string right here. I'm just going to use my first name. Now, if we go ahead and save things, and actually rerun the script from the terminal, what do we get? I get my same object of type person, this time with a property set up. We have first name set equal to the string Andrew. So there we have it. We have used the constructor function to create a new instance of person, and we've also customized it a little bit. But clearly, this data isn't going to come from the constructor function itself. Otherwise, all instances of person would have the same first name. Instead, this is going to come from function arguments. Let's pass in the first name right here as the first argument. Then up above, we'll actually name that one. First name seems appropriate. And then we're going to use the argument value here instead of just providing it statically. First name. Now we'll be able to make multiple instances of person, providing a unique first name for each. If we go ahead and save things and rerun it, we're going to get the exact same result, just the data is now more flexible. Now, one more thing I want to talk about. When we saw other examples of the new operator, we always had an uppercase first letter, which is typically not what we have. We usually only use an uppercase letter when we have a second word or third word in our variable names. Now, for constructor functions, this is merely a convention, meaning that it's not enforced in any way by the language. As we can clearly see, things are working well with a lowercase p. But going forward, anytime we define a constructor function, we're going to be using an uppercase P. You're going to see that in pretty much any JavaScript code anyone's ever written. This convention just makes it a bit more obvious that the function is supposed to be called with the new operator. So right here, if I were to see person, I would say, oh, okay, I want to call that with new because of the uppercase first letter. If it didn't, I would say this does not need to be called with new. Since we are creating a constructor function, we're going to stick with that capital P. Once again, just convention. Do you have to do it? No, but you should to fall in line with what everyone else out there is doing. You'll also notice that we're not returning anything from the constructor function. There is no need to return anything from this function. The new object is used. As we can see, the new object came back and was stored on me without us ever adding return inside of the function. This is another thing that the new operator does. It creates that new object and it also uses it as the return value implicitly. Now we could override that by explicitly using return above, but this is not recommended and there is almost zero reason to ever do so. If you do want to return another object, you can, but there's never a point to that. So right here, just to prove that it works, I could go ahead and rerun the script and I get an empty object back, the thing I returned. But that's never what we want. The whole point of the constructor function is to set up that unique object and then get access to it. So we want to leave return off from our constructor functions. Now we can set up a few other pieces of data as well. Right here, I'm also going to provide room for a last name and an age. Up above, we're going to need to provide names for both of those. I'll use last name and age, and then we're going to need to set up both of those properties on this. So this.lastName gets its initial value from last name itself. Down below that, we're going to have this.age getting its initial value from age itself. Now we can go ahead and rerun the script, and this time around, we are going to get our object of type capital P person, and we're going to see that all three values are in there. Now what we have here is a regular old object. If I wanted to, I could go ahead and access specific values. For example, I could use me.age to figure out what the age of the person is. If I were to run the script, I would get 27. I could also use what we know about objects to manipulate one of those properties. Right here, I could go ahead and set me.firstName equal to something else like my sister's first name. Then if I were to save things and rerun it, we would indeed see that change made. So what we have here is a regular object. We can use all of those object features that we've already explored. Now let's go ahead and create a second person. So down below, const, I'll have someone else like person2, set that equal to, we're going to use the new operator again with our person constructor function, and we're going to pass in the data that's expected. We have our names. I'm going to go ahead and use the name from the previous video, that was Clancy Turner, as the last name. I got that from a random name generator, but I very much liked it, so I stuck with it. And then right here, 51 as the age. Now we can go ahead and use him as well. So right here, console.log person2, just dumping it to the console. And when we do so, we now see we have two instances of our object of type person. The first represents that first person with a different set of values, and the second represents that second person. Both have the same attributes, first name, last name, and age. It is the values which differ. So there we have it, our very first little constructor function for person. Now it's challenge time. You're going to create a constructor function of your very own. The constructor function that you're going to be creating is for the word game Hangman. So over here in OOP, hangman.js. If you haven't played Hangman before, essentially you have a word. Let's say it is cat. You start off with 3 underscores instead of the letters. You as the player then guess letters. If you guess it right, it shows up. Then you continue guessing until you get the whole thing. If you get the whole thing, you win. If you run out of guesses, maybe you only have 2 missed attempts, then you lose. So over here, we're going to kick things off by creating the constructor function for that game. Let's go ahead and dive into the 3 steps. First up, you're going to be creating the constructor function for the Hangman game. Second up, you're going to be setting up 2 attributes. These are going to be passed into the constructor function, one for the word itself. So the word could be cat, the word could be something more complex like guesses, and a second argument for the number of missed guesses you want to allow. So if you have an easy word, you might only allow 2 missed guesses. If you have a much more complex one, let's say California, you might allow for 4 or 5 missed attempts before you consider it a failure. We don't have to worry about the rules of the game just yet. All we need to know is that we want to set up those 2 attributes. Last up, you want to use what you just created. We're going to make 2 instances of the Hangman game. We're going to pass in the appropriate values for them, and then we're going to print both to the console to make sure those attributes show up on our custom object type. Take as much time as you need to get this one done. Feel free to refer back to the old code that we just wrote. Pause the video, knock this out, test your work by running the script, then click play. How'd you do? Hopefully you were able to go through that process without too much trouble. Step 1, I'm going to create my constructor function. So const hangman. I'm going to stick with the uppercase convention, even though it's not enforced. Then I'm going to set up my function using a regular function and not an arrow function, because remember, arrow functions don't bind this. We need access to this to customize the instance of the Hangman game. Now we are going to set this up to take those 2 values. The first one is going to be the word itself. I can just call that word. And the second one is going to be the number of guesses allowed. I could call that something like remaining guesses. Obviously, you could have picked different names for both of those. Then inside of here, I'm going to set this dot word equal to whatever value was passed into the constructor, and the same thing down below. This dot remaining guesses equals whatever was passed in for remaining guesses. So that knocks out steps 1 and steps 2. Step 3 was to create multiple instances of it, passing in appropriate values and printing both instances. Right here, const game1, for example, equals a new Hangman game. I'm going to stick with an easy word like cat, and since it is so easy, I'll just give you a couple of guesses. Then we're going to go ahead and print that to the screen, console.log game1. Perfect. We're going to do this one more time, const game2. For game 2, we are still going to use the new operator with our custom constructor function. We're going to pass in a different word. I'll go ahead and use something like New Jersey, a neighboring state over here, and then I'll set up the number of guesses. Let's go ahead and give you 4 for that one, and then finally, we're just going to print it. Console.log game2. Excellent. Now that we have all of these steps completed, we can go ahead and remove those challenge comments down below, save the file, and run it over from the terminal. I'll use clear to clear up the terminal output, and then node space hangman.js to run the script. What do I get right here? I get my hangman object. I have word cat, remaining guesses 2. And then for the second instance, I have word New Jersey and remaining guesses 4. So there we have it. In this video, we covered how we can create constructor functions. These functions allow us to customize the individual instances. In the case of a hangman program, every game of hangman is going to have a word, and you're always going to have a number of guesses left. It is the actual number of guesses and the actual word picked that differ. Now that we have some of this stuff in place, some of the data that's going to change over time, what I want to focus on is how we can create methods that are available for every instance. So in this case, we would be able to define methods on hangman like make a guess, or methods on every instance of person like get bio. All of that is coming up in the next video, so stay tuned. I'll see you then.